And let me begin here with John McDermott, Mark, and then go behind. And we'll come to you, and we'll do a quick round. Panelists, I encourage you, take your notes, brief, and then a chance to briefly respond. John, introduce yourself, please.
So I'm John McDermott, and I'm the director of a program led by IFPRI for the CGR called Agriculture for Nutrition and Health. My question is about the narrative that food systems are broken, because I'm not sure it's very helpful, and people won't see it the same way. So my question is, if we agree with the Congressman and some of the other things that it's a political problem, and there was a Lancet Commission on global syndemics that said the problem is it's not a high enough priority for voters, companies are resisting it, and therefore it's not enough high priority for politicians. What do we do to excite people that this is more of a problem, and what the repairs are? Because I think, we think it's broken because of the planetary boundaries, we think it's broken because of health outcomes, we think it's broken because of social welfare. How do we kind of specify this a bit better to move beyond food systems are broken to actions and outcomes? Thank you.
John, thank you. If you could pass the mic to Mark Cohen.
Thanks. Mark Cohen from Oxfam. John, I'm fine with the narrative. The food system is broken. In fact, we just did a report where we used that phrase as well. So agreeing with our UN colleagues. Question is for Maximo. Both the video and the long version of the report and last year's SOFI as well point out that women are more severely affected in every region than men. Could you say in the minute or so you have to respond to me, causes, consequences, and what can be done about gender inequality in hunger?
Mark, that's many, many minutes. There was a gentleman behind you. If you could pass the mic to him. There, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Boyd Swinburne from University of Auckland. I'm not an economist or a systems scientist, but I might just put out a critique that they might put, and I co-chair the Lancet Commission on obesity, which developed this concept of the global syndemic. So would an economist say we're using 19th century and 20th century thinking to a 21st century problem and labeling GDP growth and the lack of GDP growth as a problem, as a problem creating this malnutrition in the way that it's forecast there, rather than that it's the fundamental underlying problem that's actually wrecking the planet the way that we create our economy. And I think we need other types of economic thinking to get the systems that we want. And I'm a system scientist would say the system is not broken. The system is delivering perfectly as it's designed to, and therefore we need to look to the design of it. And the examples of the commodities where you have farmers who are at the whim of commodity prices for products which are going to end up feeding cattle, which is wrecking the planet, or going into ultra-processed food, which is making us fat. This is a design problem of the food system, and we really need to think about it in different ways.
Thank you very much. 3 comments on the food system. I'll take the lady there and then come to online.
Hi, I'm Joanna Veltri. I'm the head of the DC office for IFAD. At the launch in New York at the UN just a couple days ago, our president was one of the many people saying, yes, indeed, the food system is broken. John, you're not the first to put forward the critique, as far as I've heard, that in fact that's not a helpful narrative. I think shaping that narrative is going to be really crucial. I actually quite like the idea of, even if from a soundbite perspective, the food system is broken is easier, the design of the food system is broken might be more accurate. What I would love to hear from the panelists, just because I think we all benefit from having diverse voices contributing to this conversation about the food system being broken, is if you had your druthers and there were no barriers, what would be the 2 or 3 things that you would want to address first about the food system being broken?
Very much. Let me come now to the online questions. I ask my colleague Lucy to read them out to us.
Okay, thank you, Joel. So we have 3 questions here. The first one is Veera Raghaveya from Andhra Pradesh, India. Can we achieve the zero hunger goal with zero budget natural farming? The second question is Morris from the Humanitarian Livelihood Center in Uganda. With the influx of refugees in Uganda, especially those in settlement, land given to them has drastically reduced, and they can hardly obtain enough food to support themselves, but rather depend on food aid. What mechanisms are being put in place to increase agricultural output in such protracted situations? And the last one is a member from the Batwa indigenous group watching from Burundi. Zero hunger is not possible in Burundi, particularly among the Batwa indigenous people, where there is a high number of people dying of hunger. Do you have any projects to support the food security of marginalized and discriminated indigenous people in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues in the room, forgive me. There will be a chance to interact with the speakers after this, but let me give them a chance to respond. And I will ask them to be focused in their response so that I know Maximo. Let's go with that. Maximo, let's begin with you and then go to Rob and then our two panelists. And I understand there are 7 questions. Pick and choose what you can respond to reasonably.
Okay, to the issue of the food system is broken. Let me put you in this way. The incentives that we have today in agriculture are a mess. Everything is distorted. We are giving subsidies to food which is not nutritious. One, if we look at the situation today and we look at the food supply in terms of staples and high-value commodities, we are going to have enough supply. If we look at livestock, the increase won't be for productivity like in the staples, it will be through increasing in stock, in animals. And that is affecting the climate change, of course, and the emissions and so on and so forth. Ceteris paribus, that's what will happen. Now, if you look at what is happening in terms of hunger and malnutrition, we are not delivering what people need, and the incentives are not aligned properly. So in that sense, something is not working. Of course, it's adapting to the current situation and to the current incentives. Players and stakeholders are playing it that way. But I think it's really good to argue that we need to do a drastic change, and that was the intention of the broken message, because if we continue as it is, we won't achieve nothing, we won't achieve the SDGs, and we won't be sustainable at all. So we need to find a way to change it. And honestly, I think we need to keep the balance. There is issues of what type of food we have to intake, and in some regions we need to intake foods like meat, in others we don't. So we need to be very careful in how we assess policies and not just come up with blunt decisions that could be very dangerous to society. Now, the terms of gender inequality and hunger, I think one of the major concerns is access to assets and access to other types of assets. And I just show land. And even if you go to any African country, it's very difficult to find titles that are in the name of the men and female. So as long as we have such level of inequality, and that's what the report was trying to bring, I think we won't be able to take advantage of that, which is basically a win-win situation for everybody. The more value added we get from the females that are underpaid and are not part of the society and not part of having access to assets, the worse we all are. So I think changing inequality is essential for doing that. In terms of the economist view and non-economist view, honestly, I am an economist, but I am a strange economist. I don't see that what we are trying to do by looking at the slowdowns and downturns is not trying to say that that's the cause of everything, not at all. What we're trying to say is we are going in a process of slowdowns and downturns, so let's better be ready and do something, because that will complicate even more the things. And that's the whole effort that we did in this report. Previously, we looked at climate change, we looked at conflicts and so on and so forth. But it's just one more marginal contribution to try to understand something that up to now has not been done, is trying to see what are the potential effects for these economies of slowing down and how much that will affect even more hunger. It's not saying that all the other things are extremely relevant. We are completely in agreement, and that's why we argue about this issue of the food system broken, is that what we are doing is not sustainable. But let's not take that as we are proposing the solution. No, we are saying, look, we are going in a slowdown, so we need to find a solution and we need to be ready for that. So I stop. So I don't.
Great questions. Let me just take the three things that I would change. There we go. I think moving towards non-distortionary egg policies is something that we need to continue to do, and moving towards away from coupled distortionary policies as we craft foreign policies both in the United States and globally. Certainly, I mentioned, I think investing in ag R&D is an important component, and that will help generate a lot of returns relative to the investments. And third, this is sort of the food systems question, but also with respect to an economist's way of looking at things, and animal livestock production, however you feel about it. Telling people what they can or can't eat is certainly I don't think, an effective way of changing the food system, but certainly internalizing externalities that people care about is. So if we're concerned about the externalities that are generated from driving cars, eating beef, growing row crops, and that causes an externality that we're concerned about, then it should be reflected in the price of those products. So to the extent that there's a lot of non-market externalities out there that we aren't pricing into production decisions, those can be internalized through a variety of policies. So that would be what I would say in terms of those suite of questions.
I think I would largely agree with what Rob just said, and he took some of the things that was on my list, the distortionary subsidies. I mean, I think number one has to be doing more on climate change, but both it affects agriculture directly, but it also affects food security through the economic shocks that often come from weather disasters that affect people's ability to be able to access food. So I think that has to be number one, and then the reorienting subsidies. And yes, people in many parts of the world need to need more protein, but certainly in the U.S. and Europe and some other countries, I think incentives to reduce meat consumption would be a useful thing to find a way to do.
Great, thank you. I would just go to the point of the food system. My colleague Homi Karas and I have been looking at the SDG, what we're calling the SDG economy globally, and I would say it comes down to three basic aspects. One is radical inclusion. So no one left behind. It's getting the basic services, basic food, adequate nutrition to those who are excluded. That's point one. At the other end of the spectrum, it's radical retrofitting of the economy. We need to decouple our economies in general from the environmental footprint that they're having. More than 90% per every unit of GDP by 2050 has to be removed. It's not that we don't want the economies to grow, it's that we need them to grow differently. So it's the inclusion radically alongside radical innovation. And the issue for the growing middle class, which was referenced, the couple billion, literally, people entering the global middle class by 2030, is that we need to make sure that their societies are built to avoid the need to retrofit. So they need to be built through the innovation of the new society that we need to see, which in the world of food and nutrition includes everything from where you get your food to how much it costs to how your cities are designed. So the urban planners are a major piece of this puzzle for everything from transport systems, how much you walk every day, to where the food deserts are or are not. This is a much more complex set of problems to which I would argue we don't have the answers yet, but we can innovate the heck out of them to get the answers.
John, thank you very much. I'm stunned. Our panelists have been remarkably brief in their response. I see we still have 5 minutes. If I may take one or two more questions, I will do that and then give them the final closing. I have one hand over here, if you can bring the mic there, and it is coming your way. And if there's any final one, I'll take from here. And the hands at the back. Very brief. Okay, let me give you my mic.
Thank you very much. My name is Iftikhar Mustafa from the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program. My question to the panel is, smallholder farmers play a significant role in the production of food. Look at Africa, look at Asia, and so on. And we know that the smallholder farmers, they are affected by climate change. They have access to finance is limited, access to technology, and so on. So my question to the panel is, in terms of going forward and trying to reduce the food insecurity, how do you bring these smallholder farmers into the picture? Thank you.
And the last question goes to Klaus von Grabmer to Julie at the back.
No, I was raising my hand.
Oh, Julie, you have the last.
Julie Kurtz from IFPRI. I was wondering, as we've seen some countries that have expanded their import and exports of food products and have also seen obesity and chronic disease really expand with those trends. Is there a concern? I know you showed a graph early on about how undernourishment is negatively correlated with import and exports. Are we concerned about the double-edged sword that with import-export increases, we may also see an increase in chronic disease and obesity?
Julie, thank you so much. I'd like to call on John, Kimberly, Rob, and Maximo in that order to briefly respond, as well as give your final tweetable closing message.
No smallholder left behind has got to be part of it without a question, just like has happened in much of South Asia. It needs to happen everywhere else, especially Africa. No question. That includes services, infrastructure, transport, financing. It's the full package. So I'll stop there.
I would just briefly comment on the trade question, which is I don't know what's behind the correlation, but clearly trade has to be a part of the food security. I mean, there are many, many countries in the world that cannot produce enough food. So there may be something in taxing certain kinds of goods or not. I'd have to dig into what's behind the correlation, but certainly trade has to be part of addressing food security.
Well, that's right. So just a bit on smallholders, I agree with everything John just said. It's a multifaceted solution there. I think land tenure is certainly one that is a hard nut to crack in some countries. I think increasing returns to scale is important to try and achieve, if possible, whether that's through cooperatives or what have you. And I think if I'm going to put my finger on one thing other than transportation, it would be that. And I'll just stand with just a quick quote to give the SOFI, again, credit for what a great report this is. I was looking back on some previous AJAE's American Journal of Ag Economics and found one from 1984 that was talking about this. Graham Donaldson, then the chief of the Ag and Policy Branch of the World Bank, had wrote a paper on food security and the role for the grain trade. And he had noted a number of policies that we've talked about today, back from 1984, that haven't changed, that are, we're talking, he had identified back then as things to work on. Improving international trade, or reducing international trade barriers, improving private stockholding positions, as use of futures markets, et cetera. But Jim Howe, commenting on the article, noted that not much is said about the fluctuations and variability around optimistic global trends. The underlying music in the world food arena will probably be pleasant, but heavy, incessant static will make it almost impossible to hear. And I would just note that the SOFI is doing a great job at looking at that static and identifying what it is.
So let me start with the second question. That's a topic that have made me sleepless for the last month or two, because it was an issue that my director general was pushing a lot, that trade could create obesity and overweight. And we did a huge review of the literature to try to see if we could find solid evidence, apart from the analysis that we do on export-led, import-led. Like, for example, in the small islands, which are mostly food import dependent, is happening, okay? There are other stories for Mexico, and there is one for the US, if I'm not wrong, but there is not sufficient evidence. So basically, we did a big conference with the WTO, and we are doing a huge research program in trying to see if there is really causal evidence of the content of what is traded. And we have a huge database on the flow of micronutrients in the world that will allow us to do that solidly. So we are still working on that, but that's a very important issue. I try to avoid causality if we don't have a clear evidence of causality, because I don't want to come out saying don't trade because it creates obesity or overweight. So we need to be very careful to really have solid evidence, and I hope IFPRI will also work on that. In terms of the smallholders, for sure, smallholders, we need to be careful, okay, because we talk about family farming. Family farming is not smallholders. Family farming goes from Bill Gates, big, to very small. And very small produce a very small percentage of the global production. So let's be careful on the definition. But if we just focus on the smallholder, as you said, they are the bigger number in terms of farmers, but they are not the bigger number in terms of production. But we need to find ways to innovate, as he was saying, creating economies of scale so that we can create the quantity and the standards that we need to be able to link them to markets. And that's the way to integrate them. If they decide to grow and become medium and larger, great. But at least if we work with what we have today because of the property rights and how the land is atomized, we need to find ways to create the scale to be able to link them to these dynamic markets. If not, it won't work for them. But the second thing that we need to do is to look at the calendar. The agricultural calendar is seasonal. And there is a significant amount of the time of the year where they are not producing, they are not doing things. And that's where we can bring new activities and fulfill that economic calendar for the farmers so that we can bring other sources of income that could target the issue of food access and hunger.
Colleagues, I'm sure you will agree with me. This was a remarkably informed 1.5 hours, great presentations, very rich discussion, a lot of different ideas put on the table by you and by the panelists. Please join me in thanking them.